Thank you very much for this kind of invitation to speak for the next 20 minutes or so, and I welcome any questions at the end. I'd like to give really a sort of a global epidemiological overview with regard to the phase 3 trials that are going on 5 continents, and then an earlier study, phase 1-2 in Australia. And I'll touch on the news from last night about one of the large phase 3 trials being put on hold. Sorry, 1 second. So the source of my information is from the World Health Organization landscape, draft landscape they call it, of COVID-19 candidate vaccines. They've updated this frequently from 21st of August, 28th, the 3rd of September, and as recently as yesterday. This is the URL for the website here. They list 34 vaccines that are currently in clinical trials, of which 9 are in phase 3 trials, the largest trials for safety and efficacy. 8 of those 9 are actually enrolling. One that was just added yesterday hasn't started enrolling yet. Of the 34, there are 25 that are in the smaller phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials around the world. And there are listed on the WHO draft landscape webpage 145 preclinical COVID vaccine candidates. And therefore, a total between the 34 in clinical trials and 145 in preclinical trials are at least 179 COVID vaccine candidates that are at least registered with the World Health Organization. So here is a slide from the World Health Organization's webpage. It lists 8 vaccine candidates that are currently enrolling in phase 3 trials, plus the 9th one that was just added yesterday, which is the Janssen Pharmaceuticals adenovirus 26 using the spike protein. That is also 2 doses like most, but not all of the phase 3 trials. I presume that it will start enrolling soon. I've heard that it will by the end of the month in our country, in the United States. So I'll go through just briefly each of these 8 phase 3 studies in terms of their locations in different continents around the world, and just summarize briefly what information is available under this column, the phase 3 column. If you click on these links, you'll find a description of the studies in the various countries. They're, I would say, not a standardized format. So some of the protocols are in a lot of detail, but some are not in much detail at all. So again, I'll emphasize on separate slides to follow some of the information. And as you can see, listed in the 2 columns right after the name of the vaccine developer or manufacturer, there's the vaccine platform column and the type of candidate vaccine column, and then the number of doses, the timing of doses separated by, for example, 0 and 21 days, or 0 and 14 days, 0 and 28 days. All of the vaccines listed here are intramuscular. There's also information from and links to earlier studies, phase 1 and phase 1-2 and phase 2. For completeness, I have this slide and the following one just to show information for your reference on the additional 25 clinical trials that are not in phase 3. So these are the earlier, smaller phase 1 and phase 2 trials. And you can see, if you go to the original WHO webpage, from which this slide and the next one is extracted, that there really are a lot of clinical trials around the world, made by companies from countries around the world as well. This is just the remainder of the 25 vaccine candidates that are in the earlier phase 1 and phase 2, but not in the phase 3 safety and efficacy trials. So to go back to the same slide with regard to the list, the WHO's list of the 8 vaccine candidates enrolling currently, as of yesterday at least, in phase 3 trials, and then the one that's on hold that I'll talk about next. This is the same slide as we saw just a minute ago. I'm just going to go in the order that's shown here, so I'm not trying to show any preference, and I should have said in the beginning I have no financial or consulting involvement with any companies at all, period, let alone any involved with COVID vaccines. So I'm just using the WHO website information, and I'll go in the sequence that they are listed here, starting with University of Oxford, AstraZeneca, going through the CanSino Biologics in China, the Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, and then the Gamaleya Research Institute in Russia, and then Sinovac, another one of the Chinese vaccines, and then the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products, or Sinopharm, and what to me seems to be very similar, but it's listed separately by WHO, that is also Sinopharm, but the Beijing Institute of Biological Products. And finally, the Moderna, U.S. National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, candidate, and then the BioNTech, FosunPharma, and Pfizer vaccine candidate that's in phase 3. So first, the University of Oxford AstraZeneca candidate vaccine. And I want to note, and then we'll come back to it in the next 2 slides, the fact that as of yesterday, the 8th of September, this study in the UK and in the US, and perhaps in other countries, was put on hold due to what's been described as an adverse event in one volunteer in the vaccine study in the UK. As of a few minutes ago, I haven't seen a confirmation of the precise adverse event for which this vaccine candidate was put on hold late last night, and then in today's print version of the New York Times, it was stated that there's an unnamed source that said that the adverse event was transverse myelitis in one vaccine recipient, but there was no confirmation by that by AstraZeneca either last night or this morning. Again, it's an unnamed source, and there's no more information available or provided, at least at this time, as to whether this one UK volunteer had received 1 dose or 2 doses, what the age or any demographics are about this one UK volunteer. Patient apparently is, what's been reported, is expected to survive, hopefully recover. So my best guess is that the adverse event that would have put a study on hold means that the patient was hospitalized, that it was a very serious or severe adverse event, but one that's not fatal. And I'd just like to emphasize that there's no, well, certainly no proof at this time that the adverse event, whatever it is, neurological or otherwise, is causally related to this vaccine. Presumably it's temporally related, but not necessarily causally related. The only other thing I'll mention is what I've heard from last night and today is that other COVID vaccine manufacturers who are doing clinical trials are being asked to look in their database to see if they have anyone enrolled who's received any of their vaccine doses who might have a similar adverse event to the one that led to the hold for this AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. So just briefly, in terms of the geography and the continents, South America, Brazil, on this WHO website is described as having enrolled at least 2,000 people in a phase 3 trial of this vaccine in which they received only 1 dose of the vaccine. And the comparison arm is not a placebo or saline placebo, but another vaccine, the licensed quadrivalent meningococcal ACY-W135 vaccine. In the United States, the phase 3 trial just began late in the day on August the 31st, so basically a little bit over a week ago. The goal is to enroll 30,000 volunteers, half receive vaccine, half receive saline placebo as the control. and that there will be 2 doses of the vaccine 4 weeks apart. This vaccine trial is also being done in the United Kingdom, clearly, but also in South Africa, in Soweto. It started in late June, I believe, at Baragwanath Hospital, Bara, and also in late August, I believe around the 25th, the trial started in India. So this is from today's New York Times, September the 9th, page 89, and the headline is Search for a Vaccine, Drug Maker Halts Trial for Safety Review. In this article and online, the New York Times late last night, it was stated that there's this unnamed source who said that the adverse event was transverse myelitis, which is an inflammatory syndrome of the central nervous system, the spinal cord. Sometimes it's caused by viral infections. It's physiologically its pathogenesis is distinct from Guillain-Barré syndrome, which affects the peripheral nervous system and not the central nervous system. In my view, hopefully the adverse event, whatever it turns out to be, is not Guillain-Barré syndrome, because that would evoke memories of a vaccine in 1976 and the swine flu vaccine that was reported subsequently to have caused Guillain-Barré in a number of recipients. But so far, there's been no mention whatsoever of Guillain-Barré as the adverse event that led this vaccine to be put on hold, and instead it's transverse myelitis. As far as prior studies of this vaccine, of these that have been published, July 20th, there was this paper in the Lancet, the phase 1/2 study of this Oxford AstraZeneca candidate vaccine, which, as everyone knows, it includes a chimpanzee adenovirus, not a human adenovirus, as do certain other COVID vaccines, like the one of the Russian vaccines that's in phase 3, and one or more of the Chinese vaccines, as well as others. So this is a chimp adenovirus. There was an interview this morning on CNN by a well-known older HIV expert, and he focused a lot on the fact that the adverse event might be due to might be, but he basically implied that it was due to the adenovirus, and therefore other COVID vaccines that use adenovirus, whether human or chimp, he didn't distinguish. There could be problems with those. I think that's very presumptuous and really jumping the gun, and I think really premature. We have no idea whether this adverse event was causally related to the AstraZeneca vaccine or not yet. And if it was, we have no idea at this point whether it was related to the adenovirus vector, the chimp adenovirus vector in this vaccine or not, or was it related to the spike protein component or something else. We really don't know, so I think it's best to try to refrain from too much speculation by vaccine or medical or virological scientific experts. Okay, I'll just move ahead a little faster now and summarize the phase 3 trials and where they're being done around the world and where they're from. So the second one listed on the WHO website is the CanSino Biological vaccine. They list a phase 3 study that is in Pakistan and plans to enroll 40,000 volunteers. It'll be only 1 dose, IM, intramuscular, placebo-controlled. I just want to emphasize that the reason why several Chinese COVID vaccine candidates are not being studied in China is because they don't have enough people being infected. There are not enough transmission to perform a phase 3 trial and demonstrate the presence or absence of efficacy. So they've gone to other countries CanSino Biological is in Pakistan. You probably recall CanSino Biological back in June, late June, around the 25th of June, was announced that it had been approved by the Chinese government, but acknowledged that they hadn't done a phase 3 trial. And also the approval was only for the military, the Chinese military. But I haven't seen statements yet, public statements about how many members of the Chinese military have received the CanSino Biologic vaccine. But they are doing a phase 3 study now in Pakistan. Note, again, it's one dose. Most of the phase 3 studies, to my knowledge, including the 3 in the United States, are 2 dose. One of the Russian vaccines, Russian Federation, that was in the news a lot recently, particularly August 11th, where it was announced that the Russian government had basically approved this vaccine, but again, without a phase 3 study being done. The president of Russia announced that at least one of his children had received the vaccine, but no more details were presented about that, and apparently he hadn't received it. But I'd say the good news is that a phase 3 study now is being done with this vaccine in Russia. Most or really all of the enrollment sites are in Moscow. And of the 40,000 volunteers, it's not 1-to-1, but it's 3-to-1, 30,000 volunteers receive the vaccine, 10,000 receive the placebo. Again, there'll be 2 doses, 21 days, 3 weeks apart. Another Chinese vaccine called Sinovac, which is sometimes referred to as CoronaVac, their particular vaccine. They have a phase 3 trial in Brazil in collaboration with a Brazilian institute called, and I mispronounced the name, I'm sorry, but Butantan Institute. And it focuses, and it's the only one to my knowledge that focuses exclusively on healthcare workers. And they've listed 8,870 volunteers who are healthcare workers in Brazil at several locations to receive 2 doses 2 weeks apart. Again, it's placebo controlled. And I note, and I quote here from the protocol on the WHO website, that interim preliminary efficacy analysis can be triggered by reaching the target number of 150 cases. And I mention that because I think, as everyone on this webinar knows, there have been many hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers around the world who have been infected with this virus. So in my view, it wouldn't be surprising if there were 150 cases in this study in Brazil using the Sinovac Chinese vaccine in the placebo group and or the vaccine group, in which case there would be an interim preliminary efficacy analysis by their data safety monitoring board, I presume, which then may or may not be made public depending on the results. So I think that any given week we might hear something about the results of this study in Brazil in healthcare workers. Secondly, on the WHO website, the Sinovac vaccine is noted that there's a phase 3 study in Indonesia that's placebo controlled. And I really couldn't find more information, in part because on this WHO website, in part because I don't read Bahasa Indonesian language, but there's also information in English, but I just wasn't 100% sure of the number of volunteers or the number of doses, or if more than 1 dose, how far apart the 2 doses were. So I will just refer you to what's on the WHO website for the phase 3 trial in Indonesia of this Sinovac candidate vaccine. Moving on to the 2 Sinopharm, one by Wuhan Institute of Biologic Products and one by Beijing Institute. Both appear to be phase 3 trials in the United Arab Emirates, UAE, in collaboration there with a particular site and collaborator in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE. This phase 3 study enrolls 15,000 volunteers, 5,000 of whom would get placebo, and then there are 5,000 who get the vaccine in each of 2 different groups. And again, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 95% sure that the difference between the 2 vaccine groups is whether they get the second dose after 14 days from the first dose or after 21 days after the first dose. So that's the Sinopharm, the Wuhan Institute, and then the next phase 2 trial listed on the WHO website is, again, Sinopharm by the Beijing Institute. As far as I can tell, they're identical, but then I'm not sure why they're listed separately. And so again, I would refer you to the WHO site itself. But again, the protocol looks to me to be identical: 15,000 volunteers, 5,000 get placebo, 5,000 each in 2 vaccine groups, with a difference as to when the second dose is given, whether it's after 2 weeks or after 3 weeks following the first dose. Moving to the 7th and 8th phase 2 vaccines that are enrolling now. This one is the Moderna vaccine with the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Disease, NIAID from NIH in the US. The trial is, to the best of my knowledge, only in the USA. Began July 27th. Enrolling, the goal is to enroll 30,000 volunteers, half of whom will get the vaccine, the other half placebo. As you know, this is the mRNA platform. 2 doses are 28 days or 1 month apart. And I would say that's noteworthy because you can map out basically when this study should be completed in terms of everyone having enrolled and gotten their second dose, assuming there's no hold or any other reason to slow down or slow down the timeline, if you will. So the Moderna study began on July 27th. To my knowledge, it has not completed enrollment yet. And in fact, just a few days ago, maybe, well, 2, 3, 4 days ago, there was a public statement by Moderna that they would slow down a little bit to their enrollment in order to be sure that they had enough volunteers who represented the demographics reasonably accurately of the people who in the United States have been infected with the virus, particularly people of color. Early on, by at some point in August, there were news reports in the public domain that that they had not enrolled as many people of color as were reflective of the proportion of people who are actually infected with the virus in this country and during the epidemic in 2020. So my understanding is that they're trying to make sure that the demographics of their volunteers more accurately reflect the demographics of the people who have been infected with the virus in our country. So if the first dose, the first volunteers start on July 27th, it's now September the 9th.
2-minute time.
Oh, okay, sorry. All right, so then the last one is, as you know, BioNTech, Pfizer, and they're doing their phase 3 trial. Also started July 27th in the United States with smaller sites in Argentina and Brazil, 30,000 volunteers, again, 1-to-1 vaccine to placebo, 2 doses, 21 days apart. And that's really where I'd like to stop, mentioning that the sixth continent, Australia, doesn't have a phase 3 trial going on, but does have a phase 1/2 trial, University of Queensland, using a protein subunit vaccine by CSL and Seqirus, and using an adjuvant MF59. So thank you very much for your time, and again for the invitation to be able to share information with you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lucey, for a very informative talk. Let's see, there are several questions. To usual understanding, inactivated virus vaccine is the easiest and fastest to develop. Why there is no inactivated vaccine trial at all from in the US? Why there are only RNA vaccines which had never been used before that are being developed in the US?
So I'd have to say the caveat that you know, it's not up to me. I don't know for sure, but what I think is that at least part of the explanation is that inactivated whole virus inactivated vaccines for SARS and earlier that for respiratory syncytial virus, and in the 60s for measles vaccine induced what we think is an antibody-dependent enhancement, or basically when people, or in the case of the SARS vaccines, SARS-1 vaccine around 2003, 4, 5 studies showed that when after you give the vaccine, then if you either challenge the animal or if the person became infected, for example, with the RSV vaccine, that they had a type T helper 2 or eosinophil predominant sort of immunopathogenesis reaction in the lung. So the disease in the lung due to the virus, either virus challenge of a lab animal or in humans, naturally exposed, led to worse disease in people who had received those inactivated vaccines. So that's my best guess. There are other issues that may be at play, and I'm only speculating, but for example, that the mRNA vaccine for Moderna, it's been mentioned publicly multiple times that they were able to go very, very quickly in terms of number of days or weeks from January when the sequence was first provided by China to the first phase 1 trial that started, I believe, on Monday, March 16th. That's my best guess at this time.
The other question from Darcy Kelly is, where in the US are the Moderna volunteers coming from?
So there are many sites in the US for the Moderna vaccine trial and also the Pfizer, Fosun, BioNTech, many dozens. One of them is, and I get the two confused, but they're on the WHO website, the protocol. They list all of the study sites in the United States, and one is basically 60, and one is more like 116 study sites. And again, Moderna, they're only in the United States. So they are listed, but again, there are many, dozens of them. And the Pfizer study, I think that's the one with over 100. And I think all except for just a couple are in the US, with the remaining ones at the very end of the protocol listed from Argentina and from Brazil.
So another question from Darcy Kelly. What about ages and sexes? Is Moderna recruiting in hotspots?
So I'm not certain of whether there are hotspots that Moderna is enrolling in, but I believe that was an intentional effort to enroll in hotspots in order to see evidence of efficacy if efficacy is demonstrated. So I think the answer is yes. The question about age is very important, I think, because to my knowledge, none of these phase 3 trials enroll anyone under the age of 18. So most of them are 18 to 55 or 18 to 60 or 18 to 65. A few are above 65. But why I say it's important, I think that no one under 18 is being enrolled, which is usual. I worked at the FDA in vaccines for 3 years in the distant past. So you always start off with a new vaccine in adults, healthy adults, and then you go from there to older age groups and to younger age groups. But what it means to me is that if there's an unanticipated adverse event in persons under 18, theoretically, for example, there's this MIS-C or multi-inflammatory system in children reaction. Some kids who get the disease, get the virus, we don't understand the pathogenesis, but we think that it's immune mediated because it comes on by and large soon after, within 1 month after the infection in kids. So we're not going to know if this is going to occur as a result of vaccinating kids under the young people under the age of 18 or not until we do vaccine trials in kids under 18. So basically, my understanding is, for the most part, it's adults around 18 to 55 or to 60. I did read that in the public domain that Moderna was considering enrolling people with mild degrees of immunocompromise, but I don't know any. I don't know of any confirmation of that or any specific details about that.
I guess he's also answered a question by Darcy Kelly on how do you control for age. So there's several other questions. Let's try to go to them quickly. Do you know how the incidence of infection will be assayed in these vaccine trials?
From reading the protocols, I think that there will be both virologic, PCR, for example, documentation, and then also a clinical evaluation.
Great. You started mentioning the time. This is Robert Wright. You started mentioning the timeline for the Moderna phase 3. Can you comment on this?
Yes, sorry. So it started July 27th, which means that it still hasn't finished enrolling 30,000. So not everyone has gotten their first dose, and it's September 9th. So let's say, and now they've slowed down a little bit, it seems, to enroll a more demographically diverse population. So I'm just guessing, but let's say hypothetically that they don't finish enrolling everyone for their first dose until, I don't know, let's just say September the 23rd, which means then the very earliest that can enroll everybody to get their second dose would be 1 month later. So then that would be already October 23rd. But then you still need to follow people for 2 weeks or more after the second dose, ideally more, to see about safety. So for me, for example, I picked those dates because I think they're reasonable, number one, but also because, as everyone knows, the commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Hahn, Stephen Hahn, has made public on his Twitter account last week that he will convene on October 22nd the FDA's Vaccine Advisory Committee to consider COVID vaccines for potential emergency use authorization or licensure. So I really don't understand that's possible to do that for the Moderna or really for me, even for the Pfizer, and certainly not for the AstraZeneca vaccines. But time will tell. October 22nd, I put it on my calendar. Okay, I'll stop there.
Two questions from that go cut right down to the chase from Sophie Tuolt and Yunri Wang. If everything goes well, how soon can we expect to have the first vaccine available?
So I don't know, but I think that the first vaccine in the United States, my best guess, all speculation on my part, not speaking for anyone else, is that there will be an emergency use authorization granted by the FDA commissioner for some COVID vaccine. I don't know which one, and I don't know when. But that's what I think will happen first, because the licensure, the full licensure, takes much longer. It's much more comprehensive. So I don't know. I think there's a push to get emergency use authorization for some COVID vaccine by October 22nd. I really don't understand how that's possible from a safety point of view. So perhaps by December, perhaps by January. But then that's emergency use authorization. Then you have to scale up production, which is being done now in parallel. But is going to be offered to the general population before it's licensed? I think it's going to create huge problems in terms of the trust, not only among traditionally anti-vaxxer population, but even among some of myself and some people that are on this webinar. And the last thing I want to say that I think is very important, I've written about this a lot in my blog on the Infectious Disease Society of America, the Science Speaks blog, is that there has never been a US FDA emergency use authorization for any new unlicensed vaccine. Never happened. EUAs have been given for many diagnostic tests, antivirals, some antibodies, never for a single vaccine that's new and unlicensed. In 2005, for 12 months, January to January 2006, the licensed anthrax vaccine was given emergency use authorization, but only for Department of Defense use. So this is really unprecedented ground, and I think that has really been underappreciated and underpublicized by the media and by the medical community, and to me, it's very important. Yes, sir. One more question, Andrea?
I think, so fortunately, there are more questions, but we are running out of time. So maybe just one last question by Vina Santoro. What exactly is the readout for these trials? At what point in time do they call the protected versus unprotected status of the candidates?
My understanding is that the readout is whatever the protocol says, and again, I think it requires virological confirmation of the infection, with or without clinical disease. That's my understanding by and large. And it's going to be up to the Data Safety Monitoring Board, I believe, when they take their interim analysis as to whether they stop the study, don't stop the study, whether they then the company asks in the United States at least, the Food and Drug Administration and the EMA or other regulatory bodies in Europe or elsewhere for potential licensure or some type of emergency use authorization.